On this episode of Bootleg, we have one of the best football minds in the game, bar none. Ladies and gentlemen, we got her. Mina Kimes is on Bootleg next.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Bootleg Football. I'm your host, Brett Coleman, here with my wonderful co-host, EJ Snyder, up and down the West Coast here. I'm in LA, he's in Seattle, and we both share a connection to our guest today, the great Mina Kimes, probably the most famous Seahawks fan out there, who also happens to live down here in SoCal because, her day job is just a little thing called ESPN. So she took some time this afternoon after doing all of her normal television duties to hop on Bootleg and talk about NFL Draft with us. We are not going to waste any time getting into this thing. So, Jay, let's roll it. The great Mina Kimes joining us here on Bootleg. First things first, Mina, how you doing? Fresh off TV today?
Yeah, I'm good. Bootleg was actually the original name of the Mina Kimes show featuring Lenny. But
really?
Yeah, I changed it like 3 or 4 episodes in back in, I don't know, when I was 2018, I think is when I started it. Because there was another podcast called Bootleg that sent a bunch of threatening emails, and I don't think they exist anymore. I think it was pretty short-lived. But anyways, well, it's a good name.
EJ, we should notify our lawyer that might be coming down the pipe.
I think you're good. I think you're good on that one. But yeah, I like it. I like it as a name.
Well, between the pod and TV and, everything that comes with draft season, all the hype, all the speculation, all the exhaustion, as an analyst, what is your favorite part of this whole kind of magical 3-month period?
This is kind of dorky, but during the NFL season, I'm so busy that I really don't get a chance to really watch college football. I watch, I watch the Washington Huskies pretty regularly. I'll watch the big games, obviously the playoffs and all of that, but I don't really get to dig into a lot of these guys. So for me, it's genuinely fun just to be like, oh, that's the guy you guys were so excited about. Okay, I see why. Yeah, right? Like, oh, man, wow, okay, Christian Gonzalez. Okay, wow, damn, all right, I can see it, or whoever. So it's just like a fun experience because of the discovery side of it. And then, so much of pre-draft process, I should say, is about projections and who's going to be right and who's going to be wrong. I just like thinking about how these guys will fit on NFL teams because, again, so much of my life is focused on the NFL side of things. And this is when, college football and NFL merge. But I tend to watch these players thinking about that with an eye, for how they might fit into the NFL. And, that to me is very fun and exciting, especially when it comes to, quarterbacks or players who have the opportunity to turn around an entire franchise. Yeah,
especially in this year's class, too, because I think everybody loves Young and Stroud at the top. But it's like, where do they fit? What is Frank Reich like? That type of stuff.
Yeah, and no one seems to have any idea, which makes it like one of the I think one of the more fun drafts in recent memory because you guys know this, like I'm seeing mocks in just about every order when it comes to the quarterbacks at this point, and also usually like it's pretty early, there's still a month left, but it does feel like there's plenty of smoke around that number 1 overall pick, and it could go in a bunch of different directions.
You have to give me your honest reaction to seeing Hendon Hooker mocked at 5th overall to the Hawks today.
I was surprised that Mike Tannenbaum, usually pretty by the book, went there. That I would. I'm not saying that I would, I don't know. I'm trying to think of something not super violent. Crash a monster truck into the VMAC if that happened, but it would. Let's just say it wouldn't be my desired outcome for the Seahawks.
Do you have a least favorite part of the draft process?
I think actually, I was gonna say it's the fear of being wrong and sort of the backlash that comes with that. And I've been wrong many times about plenty of players, as have most people who cover the draft. Frankly, it's as do our most NFL teams. But that's not really true. I would actually say it's the mocking side of it. Like I'll do a mock draft and I read them, but I'm not a reporter. So I actually really prefer talking about what I think teams should do versus what they will do personally. Again, that's just because of how I approach things. So when I'm on a show and they say, what's Carolina going to do? I'm usually like, I don't know. I can tell you what I would do if I was Carolina. I can try to guess based on, the coaching history and their comments, the things they've said, and the things I've heard and the mocks I trust. But that's not really my specialty.
Yeah, well, you fit in around here just perfectly then, because that's the way that we look at it as well, is focusing on what we know, which is player skills and how those roles translate. And it is a very different eye to watch college players versus pro players. And a lot of college fans don't understand that. We get to explain it to them. That's a great college skill set. We'll see how it plays in the pros. But you've been doing this for a long time now. What's the most significant change over time that you've seen in this whole draft process and really in the way that the teams approach it?
I definitely think teams have wised up on positional value in the draft, even over the last 5 years, frankly. The discourse around Bijan Robinson this year is probably a good case study for that. If Bijan was, in the draft 10 years ago, I don't think you would see as much skepticism about him going 10, 15. I say that, maybe he does go 10 or 15. But, talking to not just other analysts, but, people around the league, everyone kind of gets it now, when it comes to, and I think people also do a good job of understanding the distinction between positional value and player value and opportunity cost and concepts like that frankly, really were not mainstreamed, and even amongst, again, people on teams sometimes, felt differently not that long ago. So I think there's a better understanding of that throughout. I think teams tend to draft smarter now than they did in the past. I think fans are much more educated about all of these things as well, which puts pressure on us to kind of speak to them at a higher level.
Do you feel like the discourse around running back, at least from outside looking in, it feels like it's kind of settled at a middle ground now where it's like, okay, it's fine to draft them, just don't pay them. Is that kind of where you're at too?
Yeah, those early draft picks are pretty expensive. I mean, if you're a running back taken in the top 10, you're instantly one of the highest paid running backs in the league, right? I think, though, that's a little complicated by the opportunity cost side of things when it comes to the draft, especially when you're talking in the first round, because it's not just about the financial cost, right? It's about what else could you have done with that pick? What other contract could you have gotten that is much, a rookie cornerback or offensive tackle who excels is so much more valuable compared to a comparable player, a veteran, right? And so I think that's what kind of muddies that, again, when it comes to guys like Robinson as well. And the other thing I'll say is I think, this maybe actually is still a little bit more divisive, but I think teams generally are less, I don't know, I guess Edwards-Helaire wasn't that long ago, but the concept of a luxury pick, I find just talking to people, there's a lot more skepticism around that, understanding, how quickly depth runs out in the NFL, how you should be constantly replenishing at certain positions. I think that is something that's becoming a little bit clearer for people too.
And I think as we have gotten more cognizant of how contracts work, it used to be like, oh, okay, there's a 4 or 5 year window. You don't have to replace a guy for 4 or 5 years. And I think now fans have started to wise up of most contracts are really 2 years. Yeah. Very few players ever get 3+ years of guaranteed money unless they're Kirk Cousins, right? So it's we're only really sure what's going to be happening till 2025, and then all bets are off.
Yeah, and 100%. And so I think that contracts plays into it as well. I think it's a really good point. I think fans understand the contracts and how they work a lot better than they did, again, even 5 or 10 years ago. And that affects the draft because, you're not just drafting the player, you're drafting the player at a set contract that may or may not be an incredible value for the franchise. And all of these things obviously factor into the decisions.
You mentioned Christian Gonzalez a little bit ago. Okay, yeah, I see what you guys have been saying about him. Was either him or any other player? Was there somebody that you got like one game in and you fell in love?
Actually, was same position, but not Gonzalez. And I feel like I've tweeted about him a lot, so it's not a huge surprise. But Devin Witherspoon for me was the one where, I didn't watch a lot of him during the regular season at all. And just putting on his tape, I think it was just like a couple games in, I was just laughing because just the level of physicality he plays with just leaps off the screen. And I think it goes like he's a really complete player, and I'd be very curious to see. By the way, I think him versus Witherspoon is a really fascinating debate, and one that you could really, I think, mount an argument for either based on traits, size, tape, all of that fit. But Witherspoon was the one where I was just there's nothing I have a personal affinity for players who like think they're much bigger than they are, if that makes sense. I was like, I was joking about it with Marcus Fears I work with. I was like, he reminds me of like my dog, like Lenny. I'm convinced my dog, who's 18 pounds, thinks he's like a pit bull, the way he acts around other dogs. And just the way Witherspoon hits, I just know, and I've actually talked to some guys around the league, that's just such catnip for defensive coaches. And it's and he's very technically sound as well. So that's a player that I'm really excited to see in the NFL.
Yeah, physical DBs, one of my personal hooks. Witherspoon, we do an offensive and defensive 10 gem series. Witherspoon was one of mine, and it took about 3/4 of a tape before I was like, he's probably got a spot. And then you go through the rest of that Illinois secondary, and there's some other sleepers in there too. You're like,
what a fun defense to watch, by the way. Again, just
that guy's good, and that guy's good, and holy cow, the third guy's really good too.
Single high, all the chaos around the line of scrimmage, just dudes blitzing like crazy. That was one of my favorite team watches too.
But when you have a whole NFL secondary in college, you can kind of just run whatever you want. So
yeah, and maybe he'll join his former teammate in Detroit. We'll see.
On the flip side of that, when sometimes we see players, and I always need to be careful because I do a lot of my tape watching late at night, and sometimes with headphones to keep the sound down, and then I find myself laughing out loud. My son will come in, he's like, "Dad, you keep it down," because I'm screaming. Is there, on the flip side, a player that you're struggling with in this class that you just can't, for whatever reason, could be fit at the next level that we talked about, skills that you don't see on tape but you think they might have, anybody that you just can't quite figure?
I'll stick with kind of early first round generally. I'm having a lot of trouble with Quentin Johnson, the TCU receiver, and figuring out kind of where he stacks up in my big board of wide receivers, I guess, and where I'd be comfortable taking him. I just can't recall the last time I saw a guy who's being thought of mocked at that level and perceived that way look so unnatural catching the football at times. And when he has the ball in his hands, it's like majestic. It is truly a sight to behold. Like Quentin Johnson in the open field is a nightmare. And it is, and so I say this all with some trepidation because the hands thing, the drop rate, and it goes kind of beyond that though. Even when he does catch, sometimes I'm like, oh, like you didn't have to jump there. Ooh, that was your body. It's easy for me to still figure, like I can still envision a rookie season where he's productive, right? Because, a bunch of, maybe he has like some huge explosives and he lands with a team that's good at manufacturing touches for him. I could see him turning a bunch of jet sweeps into big gains. But, when we're really trying to comp him and saying, okay, he's got all the traits, he's got the size, he's so good, I don't know. It's hard for me to think of a comp of a truly successful player who I felt that way watching, just catching the football. I don't know. How do you guys feel about him?
Well, it's a rare thing to get a 6'3", 6'4" receiver that jumps, 38, 40 inches, something like that. It has a 38% contested catch rate when most number one receivers in the NFL are between like 55 and 60%. Yeah. There's guys that are 5'10" in this class, like Josh Downs was a 70%. And you're like, how is he playing bigger than the 6'4" guy?
Oh, he plays big. Yeah.
It's a weird profile. It's a very weird profile. And not to name drop at all, but when I was down in Phoenix for Super Bowl, I was picking Steve Smith's brain about this receiver class because Steve has a type. And I brought up QJ, and even he was like, I can't figure it out. I don't know. I really don't know.
I would love to hear from like a more receivers too about, I guess, whether you can improve in that regard, or maybe examples of players who looked that way in college and then went on to, you know, improve their hands in the NFL. But again, I'm just nervous about it.
Yeah. It's the hot, cold nature of his tape, because some plays you look at and you absolutely 100% see it beginning to end, and you're like, that play is in the NFL. And then the next play, you'll be like, oh, come on, man. Like, you got to make that play even in college, and you didn't. And that's what worries people. The farther you go up, the more the risk increases, and that's what's making people nervous right now, is that hot to cold consistency that is going to be really difficult to deal with. And the higher he's drafted, the more people are going to be pressing him into service more quickly, and that's not going to help with a situation like that.
We'll see. I don't know. I think last I had him maybe third or fourth. It's just the traits are so rare, the combination of traits, that you get nervous about. You don't want to be the person who misses out on that potential. But yeah,
it feels so Kevin White. Like, that's what it feels like to me, and I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know. In terms of everybody likes certain positions, or maybe they have a higher hit rate at certain positions. Like, I myself am horrible at quarterback. This is personally, for me, for context, I did not have Justin Herbert as a first-round pick. I did not have Pat Mahomes as a first-round pick. But, boy, I love Christian Hackenberg coming out, so I'm great at that. But I'm really good at safety. Do you have a particular position that you feel strong at, or maybe that it's just tough?
I mean, quarterback's so hard. Like, don't be. It's so context dependent. I thought Herbert should go in the first round, but I was pretty dubious about him based on his college tape, and even acknowledging the context. Like, I know this is a bad situation. I know this offense sucks. I know you're not being asked to do a lot, but I just don't feel like there's enough there, you know? And I was dead wrong. I said it to him. So yeah, quarterback is always tricky. As far as things that I like watching, I love watching cornerbacks in general, and I feel like it's pretty rare for me to like love a cornerback and not see him pan out to at least some degree in the NFL. I think Dominique and I talk a lot about Jeff Okudah being a guy that we absolutely loved in college, and injuries have clearly played such a role there that it's kind of hard to separate his up and down NFL career from that. But even separate from the injuries when he's been healthy, I'm like, damn, I thought you would be like one of the I thought you would be like Jalen Ramsey, like, you know, like level tier. So, but for the most part, I think like the guys who have gone on to be really good in the NFL are guys that I was pretty excited about in college.
I was with you on Okudah.
Everybody was. Dude, he was like created in a lab to play cornerback. Like, he was so good in college. It was nuts.
His college tape was difficult to grade because you were looking for what he couldn't do well, and there wasn't really anything you put in that column that you didn't force there. You got to consider, again, you said it about quarterbacks, landing spot. That first-year landing spot in Detroit, they got apparently just kind of said, hey, do whatever you want. You're good. And obviously that doesn't work for a new player in a new league. So, player that you secretly want the Seahawks to draft the most?
Oh, man. Well, okay. So, I mean, the ones, like, the non-secret ones are, like, you know, like, if Will Anderson is there at 5, I will personally pick up John Schneider and Pete Carroll. I'll put John Schneider in a little sidecar. Pete can sit behind me, and I'll just drive to the podium. You know, I'm in a group chat with a couple Seahawks fans friends, Danny Kelly and Jackson Bevins, both who aren't great follows on Twitter, and we talk about this a lot. And I think we share one, which is for pick 20. I haven't really talked about this. We would all be over the moon if the Seahawks got Jackson Smith and Jigba at 20.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know where he's being mocked right now. You guys can tell me if that's a total pipe dream.
It's not. It's actually sort of realistic-ish.
It's such a need for them. I mean, obviously pass rush is the greatest need on this roster, and interior offensive line is there too. But wide receiver 3 quietly in need, something that they've really struggled to address in the draft with D. Eskridge not really panning out, and Marquise Goodwin, who's really their number 3 wide receiver left. I just think JSN's skill set would pair so well with Metcalf and Lockett. I think that's something the Seahawks have kind of struggled with, even from Wilson to even Geno Smith, is getting yards after the catch over the middle of the field, and just having like a tough, sure-handed receiver, someone who I believe in Jigba can come into the NFL and produce right away, would be an incredible fit for that team.
Yeah, it's possible. JSN is climbing, and it really depends on whether or not teams see him or somebody like Zay Flowers, who, if you don't get Jackson Smith and Jigba, Zay would also look really nice as the 3rd wide receiver in Seattle.
Nice speed.
Everybody's got one of these, a player that you are just hoping another team drafts so that Seattle doesn't at either of their first 2 picks.
I guess Hendon Hooker is the one I gotta worry about.
At least in the first round.
Yeah, well, when I thought, and it's not outside their own possibility that Seattle's going to take a quarterback at 5. I think it's very realistic. Really depends on how things shake out. But before they did the Geno deal, we were like, I really was concerned about Levis at 5 to see the Seattle. I 100% don't think that's happening though, so I wouldn't put that there. I'll throw another one out there. A guy whose tape I have a lot of questions about, and I think 5 would be a reach. Miles Murphy out of Clemson. I don't think that's going to happen, but I've seen him kind of all over the place in the top halves of drafts, and I just don't. I feel like I think he has the potential to be a good NFL player. I just think 5 would be really rich. Even honestly, to top 10, I wouldn't love.
I have heard it floated, not to make you even more scared. I have heard it floated that several teams have Will Anderson, Tyree Wilson, and Miles Murphy with equivalent grades. So they could go in different orders, and you just gotta.
Don't agree with that, God.
Yeah, no, I'm there with you, but there are some teams that love Miles Murphy. And it seems very not just possible, probable that he's top 15. And who knows? Schneider can do some wacky things sometimes. So we'll see.
They have a history of really prioritizing athleticism. I think Tyree Wilson's the one that I'm like, I really don't think they would take it over Anderson. Maybe I'm wrong. Who also is like an incredible athlete. So but he's got such unusual traits, and in the past that's been very Seahawky.
Yeah, he's got the length. Now, we mentioned earlier reactions to quarterbacks. Your reaction to the Daniel Jones pick was legendary, as it should have been, and we were right there with you, cringing all the way through it, saying, oh my God, Gettleman, what are you doing? 4 years later, it's been okay results. Passable. They made the playoffs, right? He's coming off the best year of his career. Brian Dable sure had a lot to do with that. And we spent all offseason saying, I don't know if the number on the beginning of his salary should start with a 4. And then it did. And so kind of 4 years into it, with him getting a big money extension, even though it's technically only 2 years of real money, where do you feel like he is now as a player? And do you feel like there's still room for all of us to be wrong about this?
Well, I mean, I already think I was wrong, because he was already a better NFL player than I ever thought he would be. Whether he was worth it was 7, right? 7?
6.
6. Wow. Yeah. I mean, that was not a good quarterback draft, so you have to take that into consideration as well. But I'll say this. I view him right now as like a pretty average quarterback, frankly. I'm dubious about whether that contract will be worth it if last season was the ceiling. Now, his surroundings were, pretty... It's a complicated thing to assess because in one level, he wasn't asked to do a ton in that offense. And the offense was, pretty catered to him. But then the other level... major issues, pass protection, obviously deficit of talent, a skill player. So you kind of have to factor in both those things and say, okay, well, if we improve his surroundings, can he take another leap? And if he takes another leap, then the contract will look great. It's not I mean, in the grand scheme of things, as you said, not that much guaranteed money. Coming out of college, I watched his college games. I didn't even think he would get here in the NFL. So he has already outperformed my expectations. I already feel like I was incorrect pre-draft because my expectations were really, really, really low, which is why I reacted the way that I did. Yeah, I mean, like most of us were pretty skeptical about it. I think varying degrees of skepticism. Is it worth 6? That's different from compared to how I viewed him coming into the NFL, kind of. But yeah, I he's certainly improved a lot, and I think he deserves a ton of credit for that.
I'm right there with you in the sense where it's like, can you be wrong for the right reasons and right for the wrong reasons? And I did not like the pick at all, but at the same time, even since Daniel Jones has been drafted, there have been worse quarterback picks. Yeah. Like Zach Wilson was taking it too, and he got how many games as a starter before he's out of town? Daniel Jones, 4 years in as a 6th overall pick, he's still starting. It's all right. We'll see. It definitely taught me a lesson in terms of being presumptuous, but at the same time,
I mean, the Giants felt the way we did. They didn't give him the option. Like,
that's true.
I don't know what to say for people who are like, oh, how dare you guys think he wasn't good until this year? Literally, his own team felt that way, and they paid the price. Yeah, I mean, I actually kind of regret being so memeable about it because I wasn't on TV too. I feel like I was just on a digital thing with my friends, but not like I feel like it was a little over the top. And like I said, again, he's outperformed my expectations.
And it's half and half too. It's half that reaction is Daniel Jones the player and his college tape, and half that reaction is the Giants in this economy. Like, what are you doing?
I'm trying to remember who went after him. Let's see. That was a 2019.
I think it was draft. Cleveland Ferrell. Then I can't remember
that
who
one.
Was 5.
I was just such whiplash when that was all going down. I was like, Ferrell?
Okay.
This was okay. Yeah, right. Okay, no, so
Josh Allen was around there
Kyler, too. Quinn. That was all like, yeah. Oh, Josh Allen, Ed Oliver. Kind of a dubious draft. So
yeah. Not exactly like
it's funny because actually the pick I was much worse about was Dexter Lawrence, who I actually liked as a player, but even at 17 I was like, positional value. Yeah. That's something I've kind of reevaluated. I think that positional value is really evolved in response to defensive scheme and all that. But he's been freaking awesome. So I didn't hate that pick, but I was like, oh. And I think I'll be candid, I was just pretty dubious of Gettleman generally at that point. But Lawrence has just been a freaking beast for them, man. He's so good.
Also, at that time we weren't used to nose tackles that could rush the passer. That never entered our mind, Yeah,
we're still bumping up against that this year with Keanu Benton and people thinking, oh, well, he's a nose tackle. He can't go in the first. It's like, have you seen him play? He might. He might. So, hypothetical question for you. If it was used to earn the Seahawks another Super Bowl title, would you be willing to grant amnesty to the goal line fade?
Yeah, sure. I feel like that I haven't run the numbers on that lately. I think they're about the same in terms of the efficiency of it, but God,
as in not very
not great. There's certain players who I'll allow it for. Mike Evans, I guess. But yeah, that's fine.
Oh, yeah. We'll ramp up the difficulty. So the Seahawks get Quentin Johnston as the third receiver and throw him a goal line fade. How are we feeling now?
I mean, that's Quentin Johnston as wide receiver 3, just jet sweeps and end arounds and that offense, fine. I mean...
She's like,
the
I'll
copium.
take it.
The copium.
Yeah, I'll take it, yeah. That would be a crazy... Him and DK getting off the bus. Oh, my God.
Oh, it's all bus team for sure. Every receiver, well, other than Tyler, every receiver's like 6'3".
Poor little Tyler Lockett. He's so great.
All right, we have a 60-second speed round. We're going to ask you single questions about your ESPN colleagues, and you have to pick one to participate in each of the following events. And you can pick one for multiple categories. But who of your ESPN colleagues fits best for solving and exiting an escape room?
Dominic Foxworth. Easy. Just very quick on his feet. Does not freak out ever. I've actually done an escape room with Bill Barnwell.
Really?
I think so. I think it was at the Minneapolis Super Bowl at the Mall of America. I think we did one together. I'm not 100% sure.
Did you make it out in time?
It's a weird fake memory. I'm terrible at them, by the way. So.
What about selling as many Girl Scout cookies as possible to shoppers leaving a supermarket in 1 hour? Who would do
Marcus
that the
Spears.
fastest?
Come on, Marcus Spears. You're not buying cookies from Marcus Spears.
That's true. That's true.
So easy.
What is your Girl Scout like? Samoas or?
I like Samoas.
Tagalongs?
They're always coming out with new. I like tagalongs too. They're always coming out with new ones, which is confusing. And I feel like the new ones are always kind of like dry. But yeah, I have a colleague has like a daughter who sells them, and I always get Samoas.
Frozen Thin Mints, man. You can't go wrong.
I'm not a mint person.
A speed eating contest.
Okay, this might surprise you. Dan Orlovsky. I realize
it does surprise me.
Well, the thing is, when you think about him, you think about eating bad food takes. That doesn't matter for speed eating. We're just talking about pure speed. That man will sit down and just hoover food. I've seen him just crush like the worst food you've ever seen, but he will crush it.
Is he getting better about like the kimchi and
No.
What was the thing you made him eat in Vegas?
We went to Major Domo in Vegas, which was, and he loved everything. He's just like a baby.
It's fine. He'll get there. What about a weekend wilderness survival course?
I'm trying to think of colleagues I have who actually do outdoor stuff. I don't know if she even does outdoor stuff and she's like extremely pregnant, but I would still choose Laura Rutledge because she's the fastest problem solver. I probably should have done her for the escape room too. But she can like solve anything incredibly quickly. She's like super smart and super quick on her feet. And I think she does like outdoor stuff actually. I've seen her camping and stuff.
One final one. Using National Speech and Debate Association rules in terms of debating an NFL rule change, who could survive the best?
Probably Bomani, who's like the
that's
best
a good one.
debater I've ever met. Yeah.
I honestly think you're the answer to this question. You can't pick yourself, but if I was picking somebody, I think I'd probably take you for the last one.
Apologies for my dog going nuts. He probably is mad I didn't pick him for any of these in the distance.
Well, here, we'll make him happy. What's your 60-second scouting report on Lenny?
I mean, Lenny, he's got that dog in him, you know? Literally. He's getting up in the years, but he's still pretty, like, he's got game speed. Fluid hips, which might surprise veterinarians. Always talking about how good his hips are. I think he would probably play cornerback. He's got like that cornerback mentality. Forgets the last play, always thinking ahead, always competing. Good ball skills at his size. Just natural agility. He's the toughest dog I know.
And great in the locker room, obviously. Team leader.
I don't know about that. Yeah, I have to make stuff up. Yeah.
All right. Toughest question.
Solid mid-round pick, sounds like. Lenny fits right in that mid-round conversation.
All-time favorite Seahawk.
It's Marshawn Lynch. I mean, I could try to be cool and, go back in time and choose someone from the 80s or when I grew up, the 90s. But honestly, Marshawn Lynch is the coolest player I've ever seen. He's the coolest human being I've ever been around. He's the only NFL player who I've ever been genuinely starstruck by. I don't know if you guys have ever been around him in person. First of all, the shocking thing is he's big. I think that's usually when you meet running backs, they're like smaller than you. He's just big.
He's yoked too.
And he's just super rocky. He just exudes cool. It's like truly intimidating, but the best guy.
Every time I go up to Seattle too, because EJ lives up there, like I still probably see more Marshawn jerseys than anybody else around town.
Yeah, Marshawn for president. I mean, he's just he his Q rating is through the roof.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's anything he can't do. Obviously, his post-playing career, he's had pretty varied interests, and co-owner of the Kraken. Like,
is he?
Come on, he's in the ownership group. Yeah, he's got a stake in the Kraken.
And just as a player, I guess I should have actually just what a fun player to watch. Like, I just have so many memories of being at games in person back when I used to go more often, seeing some of those legendary runs in person. Actually, well, I would say Cam Chancellor was probably my second from that era, my favorite to watch in person. But yeah, Marshawn Lynch is just unreal.
And that stadium gets so loud. So
Crazy.
EJ and I were at the Russell Wilson return game, week 1.
Oh, wow.
There. My organs were vibrating. I have so never been in a stadium that loud in my life.
What was it like watching Geno week 1? Were you guys just like, what is happening?
Oh, and by the second quarter, the chants were going. Like, the whole place was rocking. Like, there was a lot of Denver fans in the stands. Like, you saw the orange and everything. Like, midway through the second quarter, not a peep out of them. And it was probably only 70% Hawks fans there. And it was still the loudest stadium I've ever been in my life. 2 days before that, I was in Austin for Bama, Texas, with 110,000 people screaming at Bryce Young. That was still louder in Seattle. I have never felt anything like that.
I watched that game week 1 in Bristol with my colleague Ella Duncan, who's a Broncos fan, at her house, and her parents, who are like intense Broncos fans, were with us. And the whole time I was just like dying on the inside laughing, because I was like, this is our Super Bowl. Season's over. This is all. And then the season went on to be great, but what a fun night that was.
Yeah, it was truly impressive. I'd probably seen, 18, 20 games at that stadium. Used to have season tickets back in the day, and it gets loud all the time. It's known as one of the loudest stadiums in the NFL. And I told Brett, I was like, we had gone the year before when the Titans were in town. That was his first time there. And I was like, well, it's loud. He's like, yeah, it's loud. And we were both looking at each other during the Russ return game going, he's like, have you ever heard it this loud? I was like, what's that? No, I haven't. It was intense. But we can't thank you enough for taking the time to stop by Bootleg. We have to tell you that you were the first person we ever put on our bucket list before we even had a podcast. We met at 2020 at Senior Bowl, and we were sitting around and this was if we did something together, who would we get? First name off our lips, Mina Kimes.
Oh, thank you so much.
In
for
unison,
having me
too.
on. And you'll be hearing from my lawyers about the podcast name. But other than that, I enjoyed this.
We'll do what we can. We'll pull Danny in, though, because Danny is a Bootleg OG as well. We actually had dinner with him during that Senior Bowl. So, again, before we were even a podcast, Danny was a supporter. No, Danny's great. So, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it, and we'll have you back again soon.
Thank you once again to Mina for coming on and chatting with us and being so gracious with her time. Man, AJ, we've had a lot of good interviews with a lot of people much larger in the sports media scape than we are, and Mina was just the start. We still got more to come.
It's amazing to be able to add her to this guest list, this slate, whatever you want to call it, for draft season. We've got experts pretty much every week, and as far as expertise goes, it's going to be tough to top Mina. She is, as we said at the open, one of the best minds working in football analysis right now. Incredibly lucky to have her drop by, share all of her wisdom and enthusiasm about the game. When it comes right down to it, she's a fan. She loves the draft as a process and loves thinking about it like we do in terms of translation of how all those skills move to the league, and that makes it a perfect fit.
Now, in terms of what we have coming up for the rest of draft season, obviously more interviews with more experts, especially guys that specialize in certain positions. Again, on Twitter, you'll get updates for that pretty quickly here. We did our live stream last week. We got another live stream coming up next week, the day after next week's episode drops. So keep an eye out for updates on that live stream, time and date to come ask questions, talk draft, all that normal stuff that we're doing during these streams. By then, I'm pretty sure you will have been to UW's Pro Day, right, Each?
Indeed. By the time this probably comes out, I will have already been there, and you were at USC's swim meet. I mean, Pro Day.
Okay, hold on. I gotta talk about that. That was one of the rainiest days I've ever experienced as a Californian in 30 years. And like, we've had rainy days and everything like that. But in terms of, to borrow a term from my father, horse pissing on a flat rock, that's what it felt like out there. It was a monsoon, and then it broke for like an hour of sunlight, which they happened to like do drills during because they were trying to time it. And then it went right back to monsoon again. It was ridiculous. And we're all sitting out there on the bleachers, and the field is under an inch of water. And I was like, they're doing the 40 in this? And we got word that their indoor facility is only about 40 yards long. So unless you guys want turning themselves into like, pink mist on the wall, they're not doing a 40 inside. They're just going to run into the wall at full speed. So they're like, we got to do it outside. And, I put out a tweet, and I think people misinterpreted a little bit because they thought I was dunking on USC. And it's like, I'm not dunking on USC. Like, they don't need an indoor facility because it's fucking California. Like, look at me. Behind this is blue skies. This is what it's like 330 days a year. But on the one day where they really needed it, they didn't have it. And so you had guys out there running 40s, and even when the field drained a little bit, it was still soggy. And I didn't even post any of the times. Like Travis Dye, the running back there, who I like a lot, he's coming off injury, which is why he didn't participate at Shrine Bowl. He was just there for interviews. But he ran like a 4.71 that I hand time myself, and I'm like, I'm not it's meaningless here. Like,
no.
He's running in a swamp. Like, what do you want me to get from this? So all I really got from it was just that all the scouts that were there for all 32 teams just kept looking at Caleb Williams, and I was like, yep, they're shopping for next year's model already. Like, that's what they're here for, is let's go watch Jordan Addison run some routes, and let's look at Caleb Williams.
Yeah, people asked me, I was on the radio the other day, and Ryan Leaf was one of the co-hosts, and he said, what do you really get out of a pro day? What's a pro day for? And, my answer was, it's basically to check boxes, right? All the boxes for tape. These guys haven't played meaningful games in months. They are doing all their testing, and it's really just about, does what I see there either confirm or really make me wonder about something that I saw on tape, right? When we see Josh Downs go out and absolutely obliterate the 3-cone at his pro day at North Carolina, we go, yeah, he had like a 1.48-10 split at the combine, and you see him burning guys out of the break for the last 2 seasons. Yeah, confirmed. Check. It is about how they handle themselves. It is a lot of pressure, strangely, for a quote-unquote meaningless event that not a lot is really riding on in terms of final decisions. Guys get nervy about it. It is like a game-type atmosphere. You were talking about sitting in the bleachers at USC and that Caleb was there supporting his teammates, and when I was at Oregon State, it was the same way. There's probably 40 Beavers sitting around watching all their guys and thinking about themselves out on that field in coming years and just cheering them on or whatever else, getting hyped about times. But, your parents are there and your teammates are there and there's some media there, and obviously the entire array of NFL scouts and sometimes GMs and whatever else are there. Guys get, they go one of two ways, and scouts see all that. Like, scouts pay as much attention to these players between the drills in their downtime, watching their interactions with their teammates and their parents and their agents and everything else as they do, because they already have all the times. They have their times from their junior year combine usually at their school, and then they've got the NFL combine, and then they've got all the game tape. So that it doesn't give you a lot of new information about that, running routes against air, watching quarterbacks whip it, 70 yards in the air when the average, deep pass in the NFL doesn't go more than like 48 yards. It's not even. Yeah, it's not super meaningful that way, but there is a lot of stuff that you can pull out of it, and all those campus connections for all those folks that are coming out next year, and hey, who's that kid? And, hey, that guy looked pretty good on tape. What'd he run in your junior combine? Those things are really meaningful. But it's an interesting environment, and it's different at every school. Some of them are very media friendly, some bar the media, some bar agents. It is very each to their own. So it's a fascinating part of a otherwise, I think, fascinating process.
Honestly, you know what I got the most out of USC Pro Day? There was a player there, again, supporting his teammates. And he's an offensive lineman who is either going to start at right tackle or left guard. His name is Cooper Lovelace. Oh, yeah. He's a Kansas City native, got to football late, started playing senior year of high school, went through JUCO in Kansas, which for people who don't know, Kansas JUCO is like the SEC of JUCO. So many great players come out of Kansas JUCO. And so he had offers from Florida State, Mississippi State, Auburn, USC. Like, he could have gone anywhere, right? went to USC. And talking to him, and, he's a big fan of Brandon Thorne, because what offensive lineman isn't? So we were talking about Brandon, and, he had watched my channel before, and I sat there and talked to him for about an hour just learning about him. And what I didn't realize is I saw a video a long time ago of an offensive lineman doing the splits, and it was him. And I was like, oh my God, that was you. And you get more information about him. And he's 6'5", 300, former gymnast, former swimmer, never gets hurt because he's super flexible, has great feet because, again, gymnast, has crazy core strength, cross-trains at all 5 positions, calls protections. Like, that was what I got out of USC Pro Day. It wasn't the guys there. It was, I'm going to watch a lot of Cooper Lovelace next year. Like, that's the value of it. And I think that's why scouts go too.
Yeah, fully agree. It's the whole sort of halo effect, watching how guys react to good days, to bad days, watching how teammates react to their other teammates. Just an aside from the Oregon State one, Luke Musgrave is the coolest cucumber under the sun. Like, he was the entire day, and it's a long day. You got lifts, and you got to move across, and you got runs, and then you have team specific stuff that teams want to see you do. Scouts run these events. It's not the schools. The schools sort of turn it over to the scouts, and scouts run the program for each different position. So you've got scouts wanting to see his blocking or his combo blocking or certain routes or how he catches the ball, his get off, whatever it is. There's a lot going on, and he was relaxed, joking, came by the ropes a couple times where I was, and he was just like, man, look at all this. It's nuts. It reminds me of the old Joe Montana story, biggest drive in the Super Bowl, and he talks to one of his guards, and he says, hey, man, isn't that John Candy? Like, it's like, what are you talking about, man? We got a game. He's like, yeah, just coolest cucumber under the sun. I don't think there's probably anything to shave that guy, because it wasn't false. It wasn't, he's just easy-go-lucky, like, pure and simple. So you do pick up on a lot of extra stuff at Pro Days.
Yeah, it's valuable, but not for the reasons you think.
There you go.
It's not even about the times. It's not even about the times at all. All right, well, that'll do it for today's show. Again, we're going to have another episode and a live stream next week. Our guest is TBD, but we have quite the list coming up. Our positional rankings are coming up very soon. We're going to try to get those out early to mid-April. Those will be over on the Bootleg Patreon for all of our patrons. And once again, thank you to our executive producer tier over on Patreon, Marat, Consti, Caden, Andrew, Taylor, Liam, Connor, Joey, and Mike. We appreciate all you guys and everything you do to support the show and making all of this possible. With that, EJ, let's get out of here.
Take care.